What happens when a war hero is treated like a nobody at a general's funeral until the highest-ranking officer steps in? They didn't see him at first. Clarence Du Bois stepped off the city bus 2 blocks from the gates of Arlington National Cemetery. It was a mild morning in Virginia, sky smeared with a dull stretch of gray, the kind that made everything look a little more tired than usual. He stood still for a second, letting the weight settle on his knees before adjusting the wide strap of the faded army duffel hanging over his shoulder. The cane in his right hand hit the sidewalk with a soft thud. He hadn't worn a uniform in decades, but the suit he had on still told a story. Off-the-rack navy blue, cleaned but not tailored, a little loose around the neck. His tie was plain, the knot just a touch crooked. A bronze star pin sat quietly on his lapel, unnoticed by most, meaningful to those who knew. Clarence wasn't there for a photo or a handshake. He wasn't there to be recognized. He was there to say goodbye to the man who once saved his life, General William Keating, 4-star general, hero in the Gulf, decorated, respected, and, for Clarence, remembered in a far more personal way, as Bill. Back in Vietnam, Keating was just a captain, young, sharp, and green as a Springfield. Clarence was a 22-year-old from rural Alabama who'd barely finished high school. Different backgrounds, different worlds. But when it mattered, Bill Keating pulled him from a burning Jeep, tied off a wound, and carried him over his own shoulder under gunfire. They hadn't seen each other in years, but Clarence never forgot. You don't forget the man who drags you through the dirt to keep your heart beating. He reached the first guard checkpoint just outside the entrance. A pair of military police stood beneath a white tent, scanning IDs and checking names off a list. Clarence stepped forward, slow but steady. "Sir," one of the guards said, holding out a hand. Clarence reached into his inner coat pocket, pulling out a paper invitation. It was folded into fourths, a little worn from being read too many times. "I got this in the mail," he said, voice calm. "Name's Clarence Du Bois. I served with General Keating. I'd like to attend the funeral." The guard gave the paper a glance, then eyed Clarence's shoes. Scuffed black leather, the kind you polish until the shine is just a memory. The other guard looked over his shoulder, then back at Clarence's face. "You got any military ID?" Clarence paused. "I don't carry one anymore. Retired 35 years ago." "Do you have a driver's license?" "Don't drive. Never learned." The 2 guards looked at each other again. It wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. Clarence knew that look. He'd seen it when applying for housing, when trying to open a joint bank account with his late wife, when he stepped into stores with too few windows. The slight pause, the mental shift, like they were recalculating what he must be instead of who he said he was. But Clarence didn't argue. He just stood there, waiting. The first guard finally exhaled. "We're going to have to check this. Just give us a moment. Please, stand off to the side." So he did. He stepped away from the line of arriving guests. Clean suits, polished metals, bright dresses, and fresh haircuts. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody said his name. He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a crumpled tissue, wiping the sweat off his brow. His hand trembled slightly, but he steadied it with the other. The truth was, he'd been preparing for this day for weeks. His daughter drove in from Raleigh to help him find a suit. His grandson printed out directions to the cemetery. He called ahead, double-checked the bus routes, set aside enough cash for a return ticket. He did everything right. Still, here he was, standing off to the side like an unwanted guest. But the worst part hadn't even happened yet. Clarence adjusted his cane and glanced down the long line of cars pulling up to the cemetery's gates. A black Cadillac with government plates passed by, its window cracked just enough to reveal a neatly folded military hat resting on the dashboard. Then came 2 more sedans, tinted windows, chrome badges, handlers, and earpieces. He saw the kind of faces that were used to being noticed. Tall, pressed, upright. The uniforms of today. High collars, rows of ribbons, soft hands. They didn't see him. Or if they did, they looked right through him, like he was part of the landscaping. A woman in a blue dress and pearls stepped out of one of the vehicles. She walked like the ground belonged to her. The guards waved her through with a nod, not a question asked. Clarence chuckled, dry in the throat. "Ain't that something?" he whispered to himself. He stepped back into the sun, which was getting stronger now, pushing beads of sweat down his brow. He had hoped someone might recognize him, a face from the old photos, a fellow vet, someone. But no. The guards at the checkpoint were still typing something into a tablet, probably checking databases, looking up his name, or pretending to. Clarence thought back to 1969. Fu Bai. The jungle, thick like soup. That was the last time he saw Bill Keating up close. They were pinned near a blown-out convoy. A mine had taken the lead truck. Everything after that was noise, screaming, and gunfire. Clarence caught shrapnel in the side. He remembers looking up, breath leaving him, thinking that was it. But Bill wasn't the type to leave a man behind. That's who they were back then. Soldiers, brothers, different skin, same blood on the ground. Now? Clarence couldn't even get past the gate. A younger man, maybe mid-30s, walked up with a clipboard. His suit was neat, tight around the chest. His expression was polite, but not kind. "Mr. Du Bois, right?" the man asked. Clarence nodded. "I'm Michael Sanders, assistant to the family's liaison. We're having a bit of trouble verifying your invitation. We don't have your name on the list." Clarence raised an eyebrow. "That's so? Paper says I was invited." "Yes, I see that," Michael said, not looking. "But these events are tightly coordinated. We just want to make sure everything's in order." Clarence took a slow step closer, his voice steady. "I ain't asking for a front row seat. I just want to say goodbye to my friend." Michael glanced at the guards, then back at Clarence. "I understand, sir, but we can't let just anyone through without proper credentials. I hope you understand the position we're in." Clarence stared at him a moment. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, just let the silence do the work. "I was in the 173rd, Clarence said finally. "Keating was my captain. He carried me on his back with half his leg tore open. You think I showed up to lie about that?" Michael blinked, but said nothing. "I got wounds older than you, son. I ain't here for a handshake. I'm here for him, that's all." A beat passed. Michael shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'll check again," he said, turning and walking off. Clarence sat down slowly on the small bench near the visitor station. His knee screamed. His hip wasn't far behind. He leaned forward on his cane and exhaled. Then came the worst part. Two men walked past, both white, mid-50s, in dress blues. One of them glanced at Clarence and smirked. "Homeless?" he muttered to the other. Clarence heard it, didn't flinch. He just looked straight ahead at the white rows of headstones, stretching out like an army standing still. They didn't know him, didn't care to, but he wasn't here for them. He was here for Bill, and he wasn't leaving without being seen. The voice came before the boots. "Sir, you can't be here." Clarence looked up from the bench. Another young MP had stepped out from behind the checkpoint tent. His tone wasn't angry, just tired, practiced. Like this was something he said a dozen times a week to folks who wandered into the wrong space. Clarence wiped his hands on his slacks and pushed himself to standing. "I've already been checked," he said. "That man—" He pointed vaguely toward where Michael had walked off. He said he'd look into it. The MP squinted at the paper invitation in Clarence's hand, then at his face. "Do you have anyone with you?" Clarence shook his head. "Sir, unfortunately, unless you are accompanied by a family escort or have active ID, I can't let you proceed." Clarence took a long breath. "You think I dressed like this to waste my time?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The MP looked uncomfortable but didn't move. Clarence could hear the soft rumble of another line of cars being waved through. Every face behind tinted windows had somewhere to be. Someone waiting, a name they could say to get past the guards. Clarence had no name to offer but his own. "I served," he said, stepping a bit closer. "I got this cane in 1971 and the limp in 69. I bled for this country and buried my wife under a flag I folded with my own hands. If this place is only for people with working ID cards and guest passes, then what was the point of all of it?" The MP's eyes darted, uncertain now, but still unmoved. Clarence's voice dropped. "Tell me the truth, son. If I was 30 years younger, white, and wearing dress blues, would you be talking to me like this?" Silence. Not a protest, not a denial, just silence. Then, from behind, a different voice called out, "Everything okay here?" Clarence turned to see a woman approaching, early 40s maybe, blonde hair pinned tight, suit clean, heels snapping on the pavement. Her badge read, "Funeral Coordinator." Her tone was all smile, but her eyes scanned Clarence like he was a misplaced item in a hotel lobby. "Sir, we're trying to keep everything moving smoothly today. Do you need assistance getting back to the visitor center?" Clarence folded the invitation slowly, placed it back in his coat. "I'm not lost," he said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled thinly. "And we respect that, but we do have protocols." Where were those protocols when that lady in the pearls got waved in with a nod? Or those boys in the black sedans? The woman straightened up. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area until we can verify your clearance. There's a family involved, and we want to respect their time and space." Clarence looked past her toward the open lawn behind the iron gates, toward the folding chairs, the flag, the casket. "You don't think I'm family?" he said, barely above a whisper. That stopped her for a second, but she didn't answer. Instead, she motioned to one of the guards, who stepped forward, uncertain. Clarence took a step back. "I'm not making a scene," he said, "but I'm not leaving either." The MP looked over at the coordinator. "We could just let him wait over there." "No," she said sharply. "He needs to move back behind the first checkpoint." Clarence felt something in his chest tighten. Not rage, just something heavier. A mix of shame and fury, burning quiet. "Fine," he said, and began walking slowly back the way he came, each step more painful than the last. Guests continued to arrive. Men in sharp uniforms saluted at the gate. Families held hands. No one noticed the old man walking the wrong way, head up, eyes forward, like he was on patrol. Back near the street, he sat on the low cement ledge near the flagpole. He placed the invitation in his lap and stared down at it. It had been printed on thick, white paper. His name, spelled correctly, typed with care. A small emblem of the U.S. Army in the corner. General William Keating's name in bold just above the funeral date. It was real. He was supposed to be there. But the people guarding the ceremony didn't care what was real. They only cared about what fit. And Clarence Du Bois didn't. Not to them. The stone bench near the flagpole was warm now. Clarence sat still, his hands folded tight over the cane balanced across his lap. The invitation flapped slightly in the breeze beside him, anchored by a pebble he'd picked up from the grass. He watched as more people filtered through the cemetery gates, a sea of dark suits and stiff collars, names he didn't know, stories he couldn't hear. It was a strange thing. To be alive, but feel invisible. He shifted his eyes to the rows of headstones across the lawn. Some had flags, others had flowers, balloons, notes written in shaky handwriting taped to the marble. Clarence had been to more funerals than he could count. Army brothers, church friends, his wife, his mother, men who made it back home, and men who never did. But this one hurt different, not just because of Bill, but because of the silence that came with being treated like he didn't belong. He thought about leaving. He thought about walking across the grass anyway, letting them drag him out if they wanted, but yet his legs weren't what they used to be. His anger either. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph, aged at the corners, yellowed with time. 4 young men. Vietnam. Caked in sweat and mud, smiling like fools. One of them had a toothpick in his mouth and his helmet backwards. That was Clarence. Beside him, Bill Keating, shirt off, bandage on his arm, flipping the bird at the camera. Clarence stared at that photo for a long time. He remembered Bill's voice. Not the commanding voice from press conferences, not the speeches he gave in D.C. He remembered the voice that yelled, "Get up, doobie, you ain't dying on me." He remembered how they'd huddled under tarp during a monsoon, playing cards by flashlight. How Bill once shared the last can of peaches because Clarence hadn't eaten in 2 days. That's what the people inside didn't know. They didn't know what it was to owe your life to someone and be denied the right to thank them one last time. Behind him, traffic hummed. A woman jogged past with earbuds in. Life kept moving. Clarence wiped his face with the same tissue, now nearly shredded. Then, the bench shifted slightly. He looked up to see a boy, maybe 11, standing in front of him. Mixed race, short curls, blue blazer too big on his frame. His shoes were shined, though. His tie was crooked, like Clarence's. The boy sat down beside him, silent. Clarence waited. "You knew the general?" the boy asked finally. Clarence nodded. "Long time ago," he said, "before he was a general." The boy thought about that. "My grandpa's in there," the boy said. "He served too." Clarence looked at him and smiled. "Then your grandpa's one of the good ones." The boy studied the photo in Clarence's hand. "That you?" "Yep." "Who's that guy next to you?" Clarence tapped the picture gently. That's your general. When he was just Bill. The boy raised his eyebrows, impressed. Clarence put the photo back in his pocket. Go on back inside, he said. You don't want to miss the ceremony. The boy stood, but before walking off, he said, You should be in there too. Clarence gave a dry laugh. Yeah, he said. Maybe. But he didn't know the wheels were already turning, far beyond that gate. Across the grass, the ceremony had begun. Rows of white folding chairs sat under a long canopy, military brass polished to mirror shine. The American flag, folded with sharp precision, lay on a velvet-draped stand beside the casket. Uniformed pallbearers stood like statues, their gloved hands still, their faces unreadable. Clarence couldn't hear much from where he sat, but he didn't need to. He knew how it went. The speeches, the citations, the proud list of ranks and commendations, medals with long names, places most civilians had never heard of. He imagined what they were saying. General Keating served his country with honor, an example of leadership, courage, and commitment. Decorated for valor, respected by generations, all true, but Clarence knew a different side of the man. Not the poster, the person. Inside the tent, among the people gathered, sat the ones who'd always had access. Lawmakers, generals, men who ran bases, shaped policy. Some of them had never seen a battlefield, but they were seated front and center, speaking as if they had known Bill better than anyone. 3 rows back sat a woman in a black suit and a small silver brooch, General Keating's widow, Ellen. She kept her head bowed, holding a handkerchief, her mouth tight, her back perfectly straight. She looked older than Clarence remembered her in pictures, grayer hair, thinner frame, but there was still steel in her eyes. She scanned the crowd once briefly, then again, slower, then a third time. She leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something. He nodded, got up, and walked briskly toward the cemetery entrance. Back near the flagpole, Clarence was watching a squirrel climb the base of a tree. His legs ached. His stomach was tight. He hadn't eaten since dawn, and he could feel the fog creeping in, the kind that came with age and low blood sugar. He took a sip of water from a small plastic bottle his daughter had packed in his coat pocket, then closed his eyes. The sound of shoes approached, and he opened them again. This time, it wasn't an MP or a funeral coordinator. It was a man in uniform, not one of the young guards, but a heavy-set older officer, 4 silver stars on each shoulder, white gloves in his hand. His face, dark brown and creased with time, was unmistakable. Clarence blinked. General Ellison? He said slowly. The man nodded. I thought it was you, Clarence muttered. Saw you on the news a few months back. You were speaking at that academy graduation. Ellison smiled faintly. You must be Clarence Du Bois. Clarence sat up a little straighter. I am. How'd you... Ellen saw you, Ellison said. She sent someone out to find out who the hell was sitting on a bench during her husband's funeral. And when she heard your name... He stepped closer. She said, You go get him. Clarence's jaw set tight. He didn't speak. Ellison continued. She remembers the stories. Bill talked about you like a brother. Said you saved his life once, too. Clarence chuckled. That's a stretch. I just didn't let him fall into a pit full of snakes outside Hugh. Ellison extended his hand. Come on, you're not missing this. Clarence hesitated. I don't want to interrupt. They already made it clear I don't belong in there. Ellison leaned down, meeting him eye to eye. You think a war hero who pulled a wounded man out of enemy fire doesn't belong at that man's funeral? Clarence didn't answer. Come on, Sergeant, Ellison said again, this time not asking. Clarence reached for his cane, his hands trembling slightly. Ellison took the other arm gently. You walk slow, I'll match you. As the 2 men walked side by side toward the tent, heads began to turn. First a whisper, then a few people stood, then the entire ceremony stopped. The minister paused mid-sentence. The honor guard lowered their rifles. Ellen stood, and Clarence Du Bois, retired Army sergeant, Vietnam War veteran, took his place in the front row, escorted by one of the most powerful men in the U.S. military. Nobody said a word, because they knew. But some moments don't need applause. They need silence. General Ellison didn't let go of Clarence's arm until they reached the last row of chairs under the canopy. The air had changed. Everything felt still. Not frozen, but held. As if time had decided to take a step back and just watch. The people standing didn't move. Some lowered their heads out of respect. Others just stared at the pair of men walking side by side. One decorated and powerful, the other in a suit too big at the shoulders, cane clicking softly against the stone path. Clarence didn't look left or right. He looked straight ahead. When they reached the front row, General Ellison gestured toward the empty seat right beside Ellen Keating. Without a word, she reached out, took Clarence's hand, and squeezed. Her grip was firm. No tears. Just something solid. Real. Clarence sat down slowly. His legs were on fire, but he didn't wince. He placed his cane across his lap and folded his hands. The minister cleared his throat, unsure if he should continue. Ellen nodded once. He picked up where he left off. And though we mourn the loss of General Keating, we also honor the brotherhood he carried with him. The kind that doesn't fade with time, or rank, or medals. Clarence listened, but his mind drifted. He thought about the first time he saw Bill laugh. Really laugh. Over a can of cold pork and beans in the jungle. Eyes wild, hair matted with sweat. He remembered the time Bill broke a radio because they couldn't get a signal and had to carry a wounded soldier by hand for 2 miles. He remembered Bill singing Ain't No Mountain High Enough off-key to boost morale. These weren't stories told on podiums. These were memories built in the dirt, where death smelled close and life didn't always wait for permission. The minister finished. The flag was folded by the honor guard with practiced care, each corner crisp, each movement precise. When it was handed to Ellen, she took it in both arms and held it close. Then she turned slightly and placed it on Clarence's lap. He looked down, stunned. She leaned toward him and whispered, "He would have wanted you to have it." Clarence's throat locked up. No words came. He nodded once, holding the flag like it might float away if he blinked. Behind him, the rifles fired in 3 precise volleys. The echo bounced across the cemetery like a question. Taps followed. That lonely horn always hit the chest harder than any speech ever could. Clarence closed his eyes. In that moment, he was 22 again, boots in the mud, listening to the same song played for someone who didn't make it back. It didn't sound any softer with age. When the ceremony ended, the crowd began to file out, but Clarence remained seated. Ellen stayed beside him. A young officer approached, offering his hand. "I didn't know the full story," the man said. "I'm sorry we didn't treat you right." Clarence looked up at him. "You know now," he said simply. The officer nodded. Another man, one of the guards from earlier, stood nearby, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He didn't need to. Clarence gave him a look that said, "I saw you. I heard you. And I'm still here." As the crowd thinned, General Ellison crouched beside Clarence again. "I don't need to ask you for your number, do I?" he said. Clarence shook his head. "Still listed. I ain't gone nowhere." Ellison smiled. "I think some folks are going to want to talk to you after today." Clarence sighed. "They'll forget by tomorrow." Ellison looked him dead in the eye. "No, they won't. But even if they did, it wouldn't change what happened next." Clarence waited until almost everyone had left before standing. He tucked the folded flag carefully beneath his arm, using both hands to steady himself. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the marble stones that stretched across the hills. The same guard who'd turned him away earlier stood by the road, head lowered, hands clasped in front of him. As Clarence walked past, the man opened his mouth. Clarence held up a hand. "Don't," he said softly. "Just do better next time." He kept walking. Outside the cemetery gates, a black SUV idled. The rear passenger window rolled down. It was Ellen. "You need a ride?" she asked. Clarence shook his head. "I appreciate it, but the bus stop's close. I'm used to walking slow." She smiled at that. A real smile, not the polite kind. "Well," she said, "if you ever want to come by the house, there's a spot at the dinner table." Clarence tipped his head in a nod. "I might take you up on that." The SUV pulled away gently, leaving Clarence alone on the sidewalk. He sat again on the bench by the flagpole. Same spot as before. Only this time, people noticed him as they passed. They saw the flag in his hands, the cane at his feet, the way he carried himself. A few nodded. One man even stopped to say, "Thank you for your service." Clarence didn't need any of that, not anymore, because what happened at that funeral wasn't about recognition. It was about respect. And respect is something you fight for, sometimes quietly, sometimes publicly, but always with your head high. He looked at the folded flag, a piece of cloth, but it meant everything. Not just for Bill, but for every man who looked like Clarence, who wore the uniform, who bled and served, and was still told to wait off to the side. He stood once more, looked out at the cemetery, and gave a small salute. "Rest easy, Captain." Then he turned and walked toward the bus stop, slow, steady, and seen. Some people say times have changed, but stories like Clarence's remind us it's not about how far we've come, it's about how far we still need to go. And when you see injustice, no matter how quiet or polite it pretends to be, don't look away, because the smallest act of dignity can stop the whole world for a moment. If this story meant something to you, share it, speak up, and remember, respect isn't a privilege, it's a right.